Welcome to this month's edition of The Property Insider. I'm Josh Rutman, Executive Director and Head of Capital Markets for Victoria. So we have a very special guest with us today. Pamela Ambler's joined us from our Singapore office. Pamela's the Head of Investor Intelligence for JLL in the Asia Pacific region. Pamela, great to have you. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
I just wanted to ask you a few questions from a more broader regional context. We talk a lot about what's happening in the local market here in Victoria and if not Australia, whereas you've got a lot of visibility around what's going on within the region and obviously globally as well. I thought it would be good to start and understand how you see the market at the moment and what investors are saying about Asia Pac and obviously Australia.
Yeah, the two main things. First of all, everyone is asking about this pricing adjustment situation and comparing offices in Asia Pacific to the office situation we're seeing in the US as well as in Europe. So the first and foremost thing in terms of the pricing aspect, what we're seeing in the US is we're seeing pricing adjusting roughly 20 to 40%, maybe even more. In Europe, what we're hearing is 100 to 150 basis point cap rates moving out, and that is roughly translating into 20 to 30% decline in prices. Now, in APAC, it's very varied amongst different markets, but roughly broadly speaking, it's a 10 to 20% adjustment, and that's mostly seen here in the Australian market as well as South Korea. Now, it makes sense when you think about where policy rates are, how the central banks have reacted in terms of adjusting on inflation. So Australia and South Korea, those were sort of the two markets that were front-loading on the policy rate front. So South Korea adjusted 300 basis points. They hit inflation head on at the very beginning. So they were the first in Asia to stop in terms, or pause, I should say. Now, Australia, the RBA, we're still getting a surprise 25 basis points, a surprise this month as well as the previous month. So that kind of goes to show there's still on the policy front, room to go, and also not to confuse a pause and a pivot.
So you think as a result, because we may not have been as aggressive in our rate rises, investor sentiment towards places like Australia, whilst it may be interested in the market, is still holding off and pausing because we're not seeing that stability around interest rates? Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about there's also the other markets in Asia Pacific where there's just not enough transactional evidence to see where this price discovery phase is going just yet. But what we do know is on the monetary policy front, all the central banks sort of take cues from each other. And we had the Bank of Canada also continuously raising rates. So that is going to also give indication to the Fed on their movements. And the message continuously that we're getting from the FOMC, from Jay Powell, is that we may see inflation stay high for a longer period of time. The longer inflation is high, the stickier it gets, and it's difficult to bring it down to that 2% target level that pretty much all central banks would like to see across the board.
So if you were the central bank governor here in Australia and we were looking to you to make some policy decisions to try and avoid that stickiness to do with inflation, what would you be doing?
Well, they already did, Phil Lowe already did do a pause. This was back in May. And they probably just have to read the inflation figures very carefully. They are looking at the GDP growth as well as the strength of the labor market, which still at this point is very strong. We're hearing and seeing news headlines saying job cuts here, job cuts there, but overall the figures haven't come down, and it's a delicate balancing act on slowing the economy, but to what degree before things come to a screeching halt.
Look, I think investors are looking for certainty regardless of the situation, and at the moment we do feel like we're in a state of flux. I just want to finish on one point which you've given me some insights on recently around the office market. You've obviously got a broader lens across what's happening in office around the world. I'm just curious to know whether you feel that what's happening happening, for example, in the US is going to play out in Australia. We've obviously seen a lot more resilience in the office sector in most of APAC. Australia maybe to a lesser extent, but I'm curious to know whether you think that's going to play out further.
Yeah, well, looking throughout the markets that I'm based in Singapore, but traveled to Japan and Hong Kong and now Australia, these three markets, I would say, the return to office rate is indeed much higher than in the US, where I was over the December period, end of last year. It's a very different picture. So New York, you might get a lot of people around the city, but a lot of that is tourist. And the return to office rate is not nearly as high as the number that they're reporting is roughly 50%. But that's a big average across different cities across the US. In San Francisco, I think it should probably be lower than that. But when it comes to Asia, you're seeing offices full, people coming back in full force. In China, it's nearly 100%. Then we have markets like Singapore, which is probably around 70 to 80, I would say, fluctuate, give or take. And people are coming back more days a week, and that's a result of also things like smaller living quarters in cities like Singapore and Hong Kong. So people have a tendency to want to work in the office. And also, in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne has seen a lot of newer developments where you certainly see a flight to quality, where people are wanting to get back to the office because they miss that human interaction.
So that was a brief insight into some of the global views that we have from JLL. Pamela, I really appreciate your time. And for our clients out there, if you are looking for more insights from Pamela and her team, we do have a number of documents available via our website, or you can contact us directly. Of course, this month's edition of the Property Insider includes some fantastic insights on transactions and other trends that we're seeing on the ground here in Victoria. We wish you a good month ahead, and please get in contact should you need anything from the JLL team.